Marcus Wellington stood in the marble lobby of Wellington Industries, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. The 70-story building in downtown Manhattan bore his name in gold letters, a testament to his journey from a small-town mechanic's son to one of America's wealthiest men. His empire spanned technology, real estate, and manufacturing, with a net worth that Forbes estimated at $12 billion. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as Marcus adjusted his custom-tailored suit. Today was crucial. Titan Capital, led by the mysterious investor known only as the Architect, was considering a $2 billion investment in his latest venture, a revolutionary clean energy project that could transform how the world powered itself. This investment would not only validate his vision but also provide the capital needed to scale globally. Marcus had built his reputation on being tough, demanding, and utterly focused on results. He believed that sentiment had no place in business, that showing weakness or unnecessary kindness was a luxury successful people couldn't afford. His employees knew him as a man who rarely smiled, never made small talk, and treated every interaction as a transaction to be won or lost. The elevator dinged, and Marcus stepped inside, nodding curtly to his assistant Sarah Chen, who had been with the company for 3 years. She held a tablet containing the day's schedule, her fingers trembling slightly as she reviewed the final preparations for the meeting. Sarah had worked tirelessly to coordinate this presentation, spending countless nights ensuring every detail was perfect. "The Titan Capital team will arrive at 10, Sarah said, her voice professional despite her nervousness. "Their advanced team has already reviewed our preliminary materials, and early feedback suggests they're impressed with the technology." Marcus barely acknowledged her words, his mind already racing through the presentation he would deliver. He had rehearsed it dozens of times, perfecting every slide, every statistic, every argument that would convince the Architect to invest. This wasn't just about money, it was about legacy. At 62, Marcus wanted to be remembered not just as a successful businessman, but as someone who changed the world. The elevator stopped at the 15th floor, where Marcus's research and development team was headquartered. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, his head of engineering, stepped in along with 2 junior engineers, James Park and Maya Okafor. They had been working around the clock to finalize the technical specifications that would be presented to Titan Capital. Elena smiled warmly at Marcus, her enthusiasm for the project evident in her bright eyes. "The final simulations are complete," she announced. "Our energy conversion efficiency is now at 94%, significantly higher than any competitor. The potential environmental impact is staggering. We could reduce global carbon emissions by 15% if this technology is widely adopted." The junior engineers nodded excitedly, their faces showing the pride of people who knew they were part of something revolutionary. James had developed the core algorithm that made the efficiency possible, while Maya had solved the manufacturing challenges that would allow mass production. Both were brilliant minds who had chosen to work for Wellington Industries because they believed in the mission. As the elevator continued its ascent, Marcus felt a familiar surge of confidence. His team was exceptional, his technology was groundbreaking, and his track record spoke for itself. Titan Capital would be foolish not to invest. He had conquered every challenge in his career through determination and an unwavering focus on success. The elevator reached the executive floor, and Marcus stepped out without a word to his team. The slight was subtle but noticeable, no acknowledgement of their hard work, no thank you for their dedication, not even eye contact. Elena's smile faded slightly, but she maintained her professionalism. The junior engineers exchanged glances, their excitement dimmed by their CEO's coldness. Marcus strode down the hallway lined with awards and photographs documenting his rise to prominence. He paused briefly at a picture from the early days, himself shaking hands with his first major investor, both men beaming with the joy of a successful partnership. That version of Marcus seemed like a stranger now, someone who had believed that relationships mattered as much as results. His corner office occupied prime real estate with views of Central Park and the Hudson River. The space was decorated with expensive art and furniture, but it felt sterile, lacking any personal touches that might reveal the man behind the businessman. Marcus sat behind his massive mahogany desk, and opened the presentation one final time, reviewing slides that detailed projected revenues, market penetration strategies, and competitive advantages. At 9:30, Sarah knocked on his door. "Mr. Wellington, the Titan Capital team has arrived. They're being escorted to the conference room now." Marcus straightened his tie and walked toward what he hoped would be the most important meeting of his career. In the hallway, he passed several employees who had contributed to the project, researchers, analysts, administrative staff who had worked overtime to make this day possible. Each one looked up hopefully as he passed, seeking some acknowledgement, some sign that their efforts were appreciated. But Marcus was already mentally in the conference room, focused solely on the presentation ahead. He had no time for pleasantries or gratitude. Success required sacrifice, and that included sacrificing the small human moments that weaker leaders might indulge in. As he reached the conference room door, Marcus took a deep breath. Behind that door waited the architect and the Titan Capital team, along with $2 billion that would fund his vision for the future. He had spent months preparing for this moment, believing that his brilliance and determination alone would be enough to secure the investment. Marcus Wellington was about to learn that in the highest levels of business, success required more than just good numbers and innovative technology. Sometimes it required something he had forgotten how to give: basic human respect and recognition for the people who made his achievements possible. The door handle felt cool in his palm as he prepared to enter the room that would determine his company's future. Marcus pushed open the conference room door and immediately felt the energy shift. The room, usually dominated by his presence and authority, now belonged to someone else entirely. At the head of the polished table sat a man who commanded attention, without saying a word. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from moving billions of dollars with a single decision. This was Alexander Hayes, though most people knew him only as the architect, the mysterious figure behind Titan Capital who had built his reputation on finding revolutionary technologies and turning them into world-changing enterprises. His investment decisions had created 3 of the last decade's most successful companies, and his backing was considered the golden ticket in the venture capital world. What struck Marcus immediately was Hayes's ethnicity. The man was black, something that Marcus hadn't expected despite never having seen a photo. In Marcus's world of mostly white billionaires and investors, this was unusual, though he quickly pushed such thoughts aside. Money was colorblind, and Hayes's track record spoke louder than anything else. Flanking Hayes were 2 associates from Titan Capital, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Sterling who served as their technical analyst, and David Park, their financial strategist. Both were taking notes on tablets, their expressions neutral but attentive. "Mr. Wellington." Hayes stood and extended his hand. His voice was smooth, cultured, with just a hint of a southern accent that spoke to roots far removed from the Manhattan boardrooms where he now operated. "I'm Alexander Hayes. Thank you for accommodating our schedule." Marcus shook his hand firmly, immediately launching into business mode. "The pleasure is mine. I trust you've reviewed our preliminary materials. What you're about to see will revolutionize how the world thinks about clean energy." Hayes smiled politely and gestured toward the presentation screen. "I'm looking forward to it. Innovation is what drives progress, and your reputation suggests you understand that better than most." As Marcus began his presentation, he felt his confidence building. The slides were perfect, the data compelling, the market opportunity massive. He spoke about efficiency rates, manufacturing costs, scalability challenges, and competitive advantages with the precision of someone who had lived and breathed this project for 2 years. Hayes listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking pointed questions that revealed his deep understanding of both technology and markets. His questions were sophisticated, probing the assumptions behind Marcus's projections and exploring potential risks that less experienced investors might miss. "The technology is impressive," Victoria Sterling interjected during a discussion of manufacturing processes. "But implementation will require significant workforce expansion. How do you plan to maintain quality control while scaling production?" Marcus had prepared for this question. "We have strict protocols in place, Our current team has proven capable of meeting every challenge we've presented them. Scaling will simply be a matter of replicating our existing processes. And your team's retention rate? David Park asked, glancing up from his tablet. In our experience, rapid scaling can create significant human resource challenges. For a moment, Marcus felt a flicker of uncertainty. Employee retention wasn't something he tracked closely. People came and went, and those who couldn't handle the pressure were replaced. We maintain competitive compensation packages, he said. Quality. Talent recognizes quality opportunities. Hayes leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Throughout the presentation, he had been observing not just the slides and data, but Marcus himself. The way he spoke about his team, his dismissive attitude toward employee concerns, his focus solely on financial metrics without considering human elements. As the presentation concluded, Marcus felt triumphant. He had delivered every key point, answered every question, and demonstrated why his technology deserved their investment. As you can see, he said, advancing to his final slide, this represents not just a business opportunity, but a chance to be part of something that will benefit humanity for generations. Hayes nodded slowly. Impressive work, Mr. Wellington. The technology is clearly groundbreaking and the market opportunity is substantial. He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. I'd like to meet some of your team members, the people who actually developed this technology. Understanding the human capital behind an innovation is crucial to our investment decisions. Marcus felt a momentary irritation. Why waste time with subordinates when the decision-maker was right here? Of course, though I can answer any technical questions you might have. I've been intimately involved in every aspect of development. I'm sure you have, Hayes replied diplomatically. But in my experience, the people doing the day-to-day work often have insights that executives might miss. Would it be possible to speak with your head of engineering and perhaps some of the junior team members? Reluctantly, Marcus agreed, and asked Sarah to bring Elena Rodriguez and the others to the conference room. While they waited, Hayes made casual conversation, asking about Marcus's background and philosophy of business leadership. These questions felt like small talk, but Marcus sensed there was more to them. I believe in results, Marcus explained. Sentiment and relationships are luxuries that successful people can't afford. My job is to make tough decisions and drive performance. Everything else is secondary. Hayes listened without comment, but Marcus noticed Victoria Sterling and David Park exchanging glances. There was something in their expressions, not disapproval exactly, but a kind of professional concern that Marcus couldn't quite interpret. When Elena and the junior engineers arrived, the dynamic in the room shifted again. Elena entered with her characteristic enthusiasm, followed by James and Maya, both looking slightly nervous but excited to meet the legendary architect. Sarah lingered near the door holding her ever-present tablet. Please sit down, Hayes said warmly, gesturing to the empty chairs around the table. His entire demeanor changed. Where he had been professional with Marcus, he now seemed genuinely interested and welcoming. I've been looking forward to meeting the brilliant minds behind this technology. Elena beamed as she took a seat. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. This project has been the most exciting work of my career. The potential applications are limitless. As Hayes began asking detailed technical questions, Marcus watched with growing impatience. This was his presentation, his company, his technology. Why was Hayes focusing so much attention on subordinates? The questions were good ones, certainly, but Marcus could have provided the same information more efficiently. What Marcus didn't notice was how his team members lit up under Hayes's genuine interest and respect. Elena spoke passionately about the engineering challenges they had overcome. James explained his algorithm with the excitement of someone finally being heard. Maya described the manufacturing innovations with pride in her voice. Hayes listened to each of them with complete attention, asking follow-up questions that showed he understood not just the technical aspects but the human effort behind them. He wanted to know about their backgrounds, their motivations, their visions for how the technology might be used. This is remarkable work, Hayes said after 45 minutes of discussion. You should all be very proud of what you've accomplished. The Team members glowed under his praise, exchanging smiles that revealed how rarely they received such recognition. Marcus watched this interaction with growing frustration, checking his watch and drumming his fingers on the table. Finally, Hayes turned back to Marcus. "I think we have everything we need for now. Would it be possible to have a brief tour of your facilities?" Marcus nodded curtly and stood, eager to regain control of the situation. As the group prepared to leave the conference room, he was already planning how to redirect the conversation back to the financial projections and market opportunities that really mattered. He had no idea that the next few minutes would change everything. The group moved through Wellington Industries' state-of-the-art facilities, with Marcus leading the tour like a general surveying his domain. The research and development floor buzzed with activity. Scientists in white coats hunched over computer screens, engineers testing prototypes, technicians calibrating sensitive equipment. It was a symphony of innovation, and Marcus felt pride swelling in his chest. Hayes walked slightly behind, observing everything with the practiced eye of someone who had toured hundreds of facilities. He noticed the cutting-edge equipment, the organized workflow, the obvious competence of the staff. But he also noticed other things: the way employees tensed slightly when Marcus approached, how conversations seemed to die down in his presence, the subtle signs of a workplace where fear was a motivating factor. As they passed through the main laboratory, Dr. Rodriguez pointed out various pieces of equipment and explained ongoing experiments. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Hayes found himself genuinely impressed by the sophistication of their work. James and Maya chimed in with additional details, their voices gaining confidence as they realized Hayes was truly interested in their contributions. "This is where the breakthrough happened," Elena said, stopping at a workstation surrounded by monitors displaying complex data visualizations. James spent 3 months trying to optimize the energy conversion algorithm. "There were nights when I thought we might have to abandon this approach entirely." James nodded, his eyes lighting up at the memory. "I remember the exact moment when it clicked. It was 2 in the morning, and I had been running simulations for 18 hours straight. Suddenly, the efficiency jumped from 67% to 91%. I actually shouted out loud and woke up the security guard." Hayes laughed, clearly delighted by the story. "Those moments of discovery are what make this business so exciting. The human element behind innovation is often more fascinating than the technology itself." Marcus shifted impatiently. "The important thing is that the algorithm works and is scalable. The emotional journey is less relevant to your investment decision." A brief silence followed Marcus's comment. Elena's smile faded slightly, and James looked down at his feet. Maya glanced between Marcus and Hayes, sensing tension she couldn't quite identify. Hayes simply nodded and continued walking, but Victoria Sterling made a note on her tablet. The tour continued through the manufacturing prototype area, where early versions of the energy conversion devices were being assembled. Workers moved with practiced efficiency, each focused on their specific tasks. Hayes stopped to speak with several employees, asking about their roles and their thoughts on the technology they were helping to create. One worker, an older man named Robert Chen, who had been with the company for 8 years, spoke proudly about the precision required in the assembly process. "Every component has to be perfect," he explained. "We're building something that could change how the world gets its power. That's not something you take lightly." Hayes listened intently, asking follow-up questions about quality control and worker training. Robert answered enthusiastically, clearly pleased that someone of Hayes' stature was interested in his perspective. "Mr. Wellington has built something special here," Robert concluded. "We all know we're part of something bigger than ourselves." As they moved away from the manufacturing area, Marcus noticed that Hayes seemed to be evaluating more than just the technology and facilities. He was studying the people, the culture, the intangible elements that Marcus had always considered secondary to business success. This attention to what Marcus saw as soft factors was both puzzling and slightly annoying. The tour concluded in Marcus's executive conference room, where floor-to-ceiling windows provided a panoramic view of Manhattan. The Titan Capital team took seats around the polished table, while Marcus retrieved a bottle of expensive scotch from his bar cart. I think you can see why this represents such an extraordinary opportunity, Marcus said, pouring drinks for his guests. The technology is proven, the market is massive, and the team is capable of execution. Hayes accepted his drink but didn't immediately sip it. Instead, he looked out at the city skyline, seeming lost in thought. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and careful. You've built an impressive operation, Mr. Wellington. The technology is genuinely revolutionary, and your facilities are world-class. He paused, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I do have some concerns, though. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Concerns meant obstacles. Obstacles meant delays. And delays meant other investors might swoop in with competing offers. What kind of concerns? Cultural ones, Hayes replied simply. In my experience, sustainable success requires more than just good technology. It requires a culture that can adapt, innovate, and retain top talent over the long term. Victoria. Sterling opened her tablet and began reading from her notes. We observed several concerning patterns during our visit. Employee engagement appears to be driven primarily by fear rather than inspiration. Communication flows primarily in one direction. There's little evidence of the collaborative culture that typically sustains innovation over time. Marcus felt, his face flush with irritation. My employees are highly compensated professionals who understand that results matter. I don't believe in coddling people or wasting time on unnecessary team-building exercises. This is a business, not a social club. David Park leaned forward. We're not talking about team-building exercises, Mr. Wellington. We're talking about fundamental leadership principles that affect everything from employee retention to innovation capacity to crisis management. I've been successfully running businesses for 25 years, Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. My track record speaks for itself. I don't need lectures on leadership from people who have never had to make payroll or fire underperforming employees. Hayes set down his glass and looked directly at Marcus. You're absolutely right about your track record. Your business acumen is undeniable. But Titan Capital invests in companies we expect to thrive for decades, not just quarters. That requires a different kind of leadership. The room fell silent except for the distant hum of city traffic 40 floors below. Marcus realized that what he had assumed would be a routine due diligence conversation was turning into something much more significant. These people were actually considering his leadership style as a factor in their investment decision. What exactly are you suggesting? Marcus asked, struggling to keep his voice level. Hayes stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. I'm suggesting that great technology combined with poor culture is a recipe for eventual failure. The most brilliant innovations can be destroyed by toxic leadership, high turnover, and lack of employee engagement. My turnover rate is within industry standards, Marcus protested. Your current turnover rate, Victoria corrected. But what happens when you scale rapidly? What happens when competitors start poaching your best people? What happens when economic conditions change and employee loyalty becomes more important than compensation? Marcus felt the conversation slipping away from him. These weren't the kinds of questions he had prepared for. He had expected discussions about market size, competitive positioning, regulatory challenges, concrete business issues he could address with data and analysis. Hayes returned to the table and looked at each member of his team. Some silent communication passed between them, the kind of wordless understanding that comes from working closely together for years. Marcus watched this interaction with growing unease. We're going to need some time to discuss our findings, Hayes announced. We'll be in touch within 48 hours with our decision. As the Titan Capital team prepared to leave, Marcus felt desperation creeping in. This wasn't how the meeting was supposed to end. He had expected enthusiasm, preliminary terms, maybe even a handshake deal. Instead, he was facing uncertainty and criticism of his leadership approach. I hope you'll consider the tremendous opportunity this represents, Marcus said as he walked them to the elevator. This technology could generate returns that exceed your wildest projections. Hayes nodded politely. We'll certainly consider everything we've seen and heard today. Thank you for your time, Mr. Wellington. As the elevator doors closed, Marcus stood alone in the hallway, trying to process what had just happened. The most important investment opportunity of his career might be slipping away, and it had nothing to do with his technology or his business plan. It had everything to do with him. The next 24 hours were torture for Marcus Wellington. He found himself unable to concentrate on routine business matters, checking his phone every few minutes for messages from Titan Capital that never came. The confidence that had carried him through decades of business success was replaced by a gnawing anxiety he hadn't felt since his early entrepreneurial days. That evening, Marcus called his longtime friend and business advisor, Thomas Bradley, a fellow billionaire who had built his fortune in telecommunications. They met at their exclusive club, a wood-paneled sanctuary where Manhattan's elite gathered to discuss deals over expensive whiskey. "I don't understand what went wrong," Marcus confessed, nursing his third drink. "The technology is flawless, the market opportunity is massive, and our projections are conservative. Hayes seemed more interested in talking to my employees than discussing business fundamentals." Thomas, a silver-haired man in his 70s, listened with the patience of someone who had weathered many business crises. "Tell me about Hayes," he said finally. "What's his background?" Marcus realized he knew surprisingly little about the man who held his company's future in his hands. "He's built Titan Capital into one of the most successful venture firms in the UE country. His investments have created enormous returns. Beyond that, I'm not sure." "Have you researched his investment philosophy? His background? What drives his decisions?" Marcus shook his head, suddenly feeling foolish. In his preparation for the meeting, he had focused entirely on his own presentation rather than understanding his audience. It was a rookie mistake from someone with 25 years of experience. Thomas pulled out his phone and began searching. "Alexander Hayes," he read aloud. "Grew up in rural Alabama, son of a factory worker and a school teacher. Full scholarship to MIT, then Harvard Business School. Started his career at Goldman Sachs but left after 3 years to focus on impact investing." As Thomas continued reading, a picture emerged of someone whose values were fundamentally different from Marcus's own approach to business. Hayes had built his reputation not just on generating returns, but on finding companies that could create positive change while delivering profits. "It says here that he's known for taking a personal interest in company culture and leadership development," Thomas continued. "His portfolio companies consistently rank among the best places to work in their respective industries." Marcus felt a sinking sensation. He had approached the meeting as if it were a purely financial transaction, when Hayes was clearly evaluating something much more complex. "I need to find a way to fix this," he said. "The question is whether you want to fix it or just get the investment," Thomas replied. "There's a difference." Marcus spent a sleepless night in his penthouse apartment, staring out at the city lights and trying to understand where his approach had gone wrong. He had built his career on the belief that results were all that mattered, that personal relationships were a luxury that successful people couldn't afford, but Hayes seemed to operate from an entirely different playbook. The next morning brought unexpected news. Sarah knocked on his office door with a concerned expression. "Mr. Wellington, we have a problem. Dr. Rodriguez has just submitted her resignation." Marcus looked up from his computer screen in shock. Elena was his head of engineering, the brilliant mind behind much of their breakthrough technology. Losing her would be catastrophic, especially with the Titan Capital decision still pending. "Why?" Marcus demanded. "What's her reason?" Sarah shifted, uncomfortably. "She says she's been offered a position at Renewable Dynamics. They're offering her a 20% salary increase and the title of Chief Technology Officer." Renewable Dynamics was a competitor, well-funded, but lacking the technological breakthrough that Wellington Industries had achieved. Elena's departure would give them access to years of research and development. Worse, other team members might follow her lead. Marcus immediately called Elena into his office. She arrived looking professional but determined, carrying a formal resignation letter. "I assume Sarah told you about my decision," she said, taking a seat across from his desk. "Elena, this is insane. You're walking away from the biggest breakthrough of your career. When this technology goes to market, you'll be recognized as one of the leading innovators in clean energy." Elena nodded calmly. The technology will succeed regardless of where I am, but I need to work somewhere that values not just what I produce, but who I am as a person. The words stung more than Marcus expected. What's that supposed to mean? You've been well compensated, given significant autonomy, and provided with the resources you need. All of that is true, Elena agreed. But compensation isn't everything. Yesterday, when Mr. Hayes was asking about our work, I felt more appreciated. In 45 minutes than I have in 3 years here. He listened to our ideas, asked about our motivations, treated us like partners rather than assets. Marcus felt his face flush with anger and frustration. Hayes isn't running this company or taking the financial risks. It's easy to be charming when you're not responsible for results. Elena stood up, her expression sad but resolute. That's exactly the problem, Marcus. You see kindness and respect as luxuries rather than necessities. Great leaders understand that both are essential for sustainable success. After Elena left, Marcus sat alone in his office staring at her resignation letter. Within an hour, 2 more team members had submitted their resignations. James Park and Maya Okafor, the junior engineers who had been instrumental in developing the core technology. Sarah appeared in his doorway again, her face pale. Mr. Wellington, we also have another issue. Word about the resignations is spreading through the company. I'm getting questions from other employees about whether there are broader problems. Marcus realized he was facing a potential exodus that could cripple his company, just as the most important investment decision of his career was being made. The irony was bitter. His cold, results-focused approach had created the very problem that might prevent him from achieving the results he desperately needed. His phone rang, and Sarah announced that Alexander Hayes was calling. Marcus's heart pounded as he picked up the receiver. Mr. Wellington? Hayes's voice was professional but not unfriendly. I wanted to call personally to discuss our decision. Marcus braced himself for rejection. I appreciate you taking the time to call directly. We've completed our evaluation, and I want to be transparent about our findings. Your technology is genuinely revolutionary, perhaps the most impressive clean energy innovation we've seen. The market opportunity is enormous, and the potential environmental impact could be transformational. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. That's exactly what we hoped you would conclude. However, Hayes continued, and Marcus's heart sank. We have serious concerns about the long-term sustainability of your operation. Our analysis suggests that your current leadership approach creates significant risks for employee retention, innovation capacity, and crisis management. The call continued for 20 minutes, with Hayes explaining in detail the factors that had influenced Titan Capital's decision. Marcus listened in growing despair as his $2 billion opportunity slipped away. After Hayes hung up, Marcus sat in his office as shadows lengthened across the floor. The resignation letters sat on his desk like accusations, and he could hear the subdued conversations of employees in the hallway outside his door. For the first time in his career, Marcus Wellington faced the possibility that his approach to leadership, the very qualities he had believed made him successful, might be the cause of his downfall. The question was whether it was too late to change. Marcus Wellington stood at his office window, watching the sun set over Manhattan as his empire threatened to crumble around him. The resignation of Elena Rodriguez had triggered exactly what he feared, a cascade of departures that was gutting his technical team. By the end of the week, 6 more engineers had submitted notice, and rumors were swirling that other departments were considering similar moves. The financial implications were staggering. Without his key personnel, Marcus couldn't deliver on the promises he had made to other investors. Current projects would be delayed, future innovations would be compromised, and competitors would inevitably poach both his talent and his technological advantages. The $2 billion rejection from Titan Capital was beginning to look like just the first domino in a much larger collapse. Sarah Chen knocked softly on his door, carrying yet another resignation letter. Mr. Wellington, I'm sorry to disturb you, but David Kim from the manufacturing team has decided to leave as well. Marcus turned from the window, his face haggard from 3 sleepless nights. What reason did he give? the same as the others. Better opportunity, more collaborative environment, chance to make a real impact. Sarah hesitated before continuing. Sir, I think we need to address this directly. The remaining employees are getting scared. For the first time in his career, Marcus felt completely out of control. Every solution he could think of involved money, counteroffers, retention bonuses, stock options, but his departing employees had made it clear that financial incentives weren't enough. They wanted something he had never learned how to give. That evening, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He called his younger sister Jennifer, who lived in Boston, where she ran a nonprofit organization focused on education reform. They had grown apart over the decades, largely because Jennifer had never been impressed by his wealth or business success. Marcus? Jennifer's voice was surprised. They spoke maybe twice a year, usually around holidays. Is everything okay? Marcus found himself unable to answer immediately. How could he explain that the most successful period of his life might be ending because he didn't know how to treat people with basic kindness? I think I've made some mistakes, he said finally. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. What kind of mistakes? The conversation that followed was unlike any Marcus had experienced in years. Jennifer listened as he described the situation with Titan Capital, the employee departures, and his growing realization that his approach to leadership was fundamentally flawed. Do you remember when we were kids? Jennifer said. And Dad lost his job at the factory. You were maybe 15 and I was 12, Marcus remembered. Their father had been laid off during a recession, and the family had struggled financially for nearly a year. It was during that period that Marcus had first decided he would never be vulnerable to other people's decisions about his worth. You swore you would never let anyone have that kind of power over you, Jennifer continued. But I think you took it too far. You built walls so high that you forgot how to connect with people. Connection doesn't pay bills or build companies, Marcus replied, falling back on his familiar defense. Maybe not directly, Jennifer said, but it builds loyalty, trust, and the kind of commitment that survives difficult times. The people who worked for Dad at the factory organized a fund to help our family. They did that because he treated them with respect and dignity, even though he was their supervisor. After ending the call, Marcus found himself thinking about his father for the first time in years. Robert Wellington had been a decent man who treated everyone around him as if they mattered. Marcus had learned business skills from books and mentors, but he had somehow forgotten the human lessons his father had demonstrated every day. The next morning brought unexpected news. Alexander Hayes had requested another meeting, not at Wellington Industries, but at a small coffee shop in Midtown. The location choice itself was telling. This wasn't going to be a formal business meeting. Marcus arrived to find Hayes already seated at a corner table, reading a newspaper and sipping coffee from a ceramic mug. He was dressed casually, khakis and a button-down shirt, a stark contrast to the expensive suits he had worn during their previous meetings. Thank you for coming, Hayes said, gesturing for Marcus to sit down. I hope you don't mind the informal setting. I find that some conversations work better outside of boardrooms. Marcus ordered coffee and waited, unsure of what to expect. Hayes had already made his investment decision clear. What could be the purpose of this meeting? I've been thinking about our conversation, Hayes began. About your technology and your company. I wanted to explain my decision more fully. I think your message was clear, Marcus replied. You don't believe in my leadership approach. Hayes shook his head. That's not quite right. I don't believe in your current leadership approach, but I've been researching your background, your early career, your first company. You weren't always the person I met last week? Marcus felt uncomfortable under Hayes's direct gaze. Business changes people. You learn what works and what doesn't. Or you learn what appears to work in the short term. Hayes corrected. Tell me about your first company, the one you started when you were 28. Marcus was surprised by the question. Wellington Electronics had been a small operation, manufacturing circuit boards for telecommunications equipment. He had started it with 3 employees in a rented warehouse working 18-hour days alongside his team. We were like a family back then, Marcus admitted reluctantly. Everyone knew everyone else's kids' names, their birthdays, their problems at home. When my lead engineer's wife was diagnosed with cancer, we all pitched in to cover his shifts, so he could take care of her. Hayes nodded. And that company was successful? Very successful. We grew from 3 employees to 50 in 4 years, but success brought new challenges, new pressures. I had to make harder decisions, be more focused on results. Or you thought you did, Hayes said gently. What if I told you that some of the most successful companies in my portfolio maintain that family atmosphere even as they scale? What if treating people well isn't a luxury but a competitive advantage? Marcus felt something shifting inside him, a crack in the wall he had built around his emotions. It's too late for that. Half my technical team has already left. Even if I wanted to change, the damage is done. Hayes leaned forward. Actually, that's why I wanted to meet with you today. I have a proposition. Marcus looked up, surprised. A proposition? Titan Capital is willing to make the $2 billion investment, Hayes said quietly. But with conditions. Marcus felt his heart stop. What kind of conditions? First, you agree to work with a leadership coach, someone who specializes in helping executives develop more collaborative management styles. Second, you implement a comprehensive employee engagement program designed to rebuild trust and communication. Third, you make genuine efforts to bring back the employees who have left, starting with Dr. Rodriguez. The offer was both everything Marcus wanted and everything he feared. The investment would save his company and validate his technology, but accepting it would require him to admit that his fundamental approach to leadership was wrong. Why would you take that risk? Marcus asked. Why not just find another company with better leadership from the start? Hayes smiled, and for the first time Marcus saw genuine warmth in his expression. Because transformation stories are the most powerful ones. Because your technology really could change the world. And because I believe that people can change when they're motivated by something bigger than themselves. Marcus stared into his coffee cup, watching steam rise from the dark liquid. Everything he had built, everything he had achieved, hung in the balance. He could reject Hayes's offer and maintain his pride, but lose his company. Or he could accept help and admit that the approach that had made him a billionaire was fundamentally flawed. What makes you think I can change? Marcus asked finally. I've been this way for 20 years. Because you're here, Hayes replied simply. Because you took this meeting. Because you're asking these questions. Because some part of you knows that success without meaning is just an expensive form of emptiness. The coffee shop around them buzzed with activity. People meeting, laughing, connecting in the kind of casual human interactions that Marcus had eliminated from his life. For the first time in years, he felt envious of their simplicity. If I agree to this, Marcus said slowly, I need your word that you'll be patient with the process, that you won't abandon the investment at the first sign of difficulty. Hayes extended his hand across the small table. You have my word. But more importantly, you'll have my support. Changing isn't something you have to do alone. Marcus looked at the outstretched hand, the same hand he would soon learn to offer more freely to his own employees. In that moment, he realized that this handshake represented more than just a business deal. It was the beginning of becoming the kind of leader he had once been, and perhaps the kind of person he could still become. As their hands met across the table, Marcus Wellington began the most important transformation of his life. 6 months later, Marcus Wellington stood in the same conference room where his world had nearly collapsed. But everything had changed. The walls still displayed the same awards and achievements. The windows still offered the same spectacular view of Manhattan. But the energy in the room was completely different. Today, he was announcing the most successful quarter in Wellington Industries history. Around the polished table sat his leadership team, including Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who had returned as Chief Technology Officer after Marcus personally flew to San Francisco to apologize and offer her a stake in the company's future. James Park and Maya Okafor flanked her, both now leading their own engineering teams after rapid promotions that recognized their contributions. The transformation hadn't been easy. Marcus's first session with Dr. Patricia Williams, the leadership Coach Hayes had recommended, had been brutal. She had forced him to confront decades of accumulated habits and beliefs about what it meant to be successful. Leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room, Dr. Williams had told him during one particularly difficult session. It's about creating an environment where everyone else can be their smartest selves. The concept had been foreign to Marcus initially. His entire career had been built on being the decision maker, the one with all the answers, the person who directed others rather than collaborated with them, learning to listen, to ask questions rather than give orders, to show vulnerability and admit mistakes. These skills felt unnatural at first, but the results had been undeniable. Employee satisfaction scores had skyrocketed. Innovation accelerated, as team members felt empowered to suggest improvements and take calculated risks. Most importantly, the exodus of talent had not only stopped but reversed, with former employees requesting to return and new talent actively seeking to join the company. The Q3 numbers speak for themselves, Marcus said, addressing his team with a warmth that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. Revenue is up 47%, our energy conversion efficiency has improved to 96%, and we've signed partnerships with 3 major utility companies. Sarah Chen, who had been promoted to Director of Operations, smiled as she presented the detailed metrics. The same woman who had once trembled when delivering schedules now spoke with confidence and authority. Marcus had learned that empowering others didn't diminish his own leadership, it amplified it. Elena raised her hand and Marcus nodded for her to speak. I want to add that our patent applications have increased by 300% this quarter. When people feel heard and valued, they contribute ideas they might have kept to themselves before. James Park chimed in from across the table. The algorithm improvements we've implemented came directly from suggestions during our weekly innovation sessions. Having open forums where everyone can contribute has been transformational. Marcus felt a pride different from anything he had experienced during his previous successes. This wasn't the cold satisfaction of beating competitors or maximizing profits. This was the warm feeling of building something meaningful with people he genuinely cared about. The meeting concluded with discussions about the future. Titan Capital's investment had not only stabilized the company, but positioned it for global expansion. Manufacturing facilities were being planned in 3 countries, and Wellington Industries' clean energy technology was being integrated into everything from residential solar systems to massive wind farms. After the others left, Marcus remained in the conference room with Alexander Hayes, who had become not just an investor but a mentor and friend. Hayes visited monthly, not to monitor his investment, but to support Marcus's ongoing development as a leader. You've exceeded every expectation, Hayes said, reviewing the quarterly reports. But more importantly, you've created something sustainable. This isn't just about good numbers. It's about building a company that can thrive for decades. Marcus nodded, still sometimes amazed by the transformation. I keep thinking about that day when you called to reject the initial investment. I was so angry, so convinced that you were making a mistake. You weren't wrong about the technology or the market opportunity, Hayes replied. You were just missing the human element that makes everything else possible. They walked together toward the elevator, passing employees who greeted Marcus with genuine warmth rather than fearful respect. Robert Chen, the assembly worker who had spoken so proudly during the original tour, waved from across the hallway. His suggestion for improving the manufacturing process had saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars and earned him a promotion to shift supervisor. As they waited for the elevator, Hayes reflected on the journey. You know, when I first met you, I saw someone who had confused being feared with being respected. The irony is that by learning to show respect to others, you've earned more genuine respect than you ever had before. The elevator arrived, and as the doors opened, Marcus did something that had become natural over the past 6 months. He stepped aside to let Hayes enter first, then followed with a smile. Such a small gesture, but it represented a fundamental shift in how he viewed his relationships with others. There's something I want to tell you, Marcus said as they descended toward the lobby. Last week, my sister Jennifer visited the company for the first time in years. She said something that stuck with me. Hayes listened attentively, having heard Marcus speak often about rebuilding his relationship with his family. She said I reminded her of our father again, that I had found my way back to the person I was before I became so focused on proving myself. Marcus paused, his voice becoming emotional. I hadn't realized how much I had lost in trying to gain everything. The elevator reached the lobby, and they walked together toward the building's entrance. The marble floors still gleamed. The gold, letters spelling Wellington Industries still commanded attention, but the building no longer felt like a monument to one man's ego. It felt like a place where people came together to build something meaningful. As Hayes prepared to leave for his next appointment, he shook Marcus's hand with the same warmth he had shown during their coffee shop meeting 6 months earlier. But now Marcus returned that warmth naturally, without the stiffness that had once characterized all his professional interactions. Same time next month? Hayes asked. Absolutely. And Alexander? Marcus used his friend's first name, another small change that represented something larger. Thank you for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Hayes smiled and walked toward his waiting car. Marcus watched him go, then turned, back toward the elevators. He had meetings with new investors, calls with international partners, and a dozen other responsibilities that came with running a rapidly growing company. But first, he wanted to stop by the research lab to see how Elena's team was progressing on their latest breakthrough. Not because he needed to monitor their work or push for faster results, but because he genuinely enjoyed hearing about their discoveries and celebrating their successes. As the elevator doors closed, Marcus Wellington reflected on the most important lesson he had learned. True success wasn't measured by what you could accumulate, but by what you could inspire others to achieve. The handshake he had refused to give his employees had nearly cost him everything. The handshakes he now offered freely had given him more than he had ever imagined possible. The transformation of Marcus Wellington was complete, but his journey as a leader had just begun.